This is the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, and I'm your host, Ryan Ray. Well, thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. So good to have you today. And I know you've been waiting all week to hear about DNA sequencing for oil reservoirs. But we've got some bad news. I recorded the interview the other day. Something went crazy with the recording, and I could play it for you, but your eardrums would literally get busted. So we're going to scrap that. We're going to circle back around with the guys at Biota here in a few weeks. But I did get a chance to sit down with Alex Rojas the other day, and so we're going to play you the interview that we did with him. And so before we get into that, a little bit about today's show. We talk about a lot of things. We talk about upstream. We talk about petrochemicals. We do a little prediction for 2017. We talk about the good that comes out of the oil and gas industry, something that's really overlooked a lot of the times. And I will actually link to a book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels by Alex Epstein. I really recommend you go out and read it. It's a great book. I really enjoyed it. And we're hoping to get Alex on here in maybe January or February next year to talk about his book, because it really lays out a case for the goods that fossil fuels actually do for our world. So here's a little bit about Alex. He is a process engineer at Hunt Geo, a private multidiscipline engineering and project management firm specializing in oil and gas, refining, chemicals, biomass, power, and public work industries. Prior to joining HGA, Mr. Rojas worked as a facilities engineer at ConocoPhillips, the world's largest independent exploration and production company, based on proved reserves and productions of liquids and natural gas. Alex has a BS and master's degree in chemical engineering from Cornell and is a member of the American Institute of Chemical Engineers and the American Petroleum Institute Houston chapter. To learn more about Alex, you can find him at his website, Alex Rojas Energy. Also on Twitter, I will link to that as well in the show notes, so check all that out. So without further ado, I talked to Alex the other day. Let's take a listen. Well, Alex, thank you so much for being on the show today. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. I'm very good. I'm very excited to be talking to you and your listeners. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Now, the pleasure is all mine. Well, let's get right into it. The upstream industry, a lot's gone on the last 2 years. You know, we saw the price of oil plummet from 100 all the way down into the 20s and even lower, I think, at some point. Where is upstream right now? What's going on? What's the talk? Are they comfortable at $45 a barrel, or do they need to see prices get a little higher?
So that's a good question. I really think that depends on which company or which country is doing the development of that oil. So my experience or my background is I've done some facilities design engineering with a major oil company, ConocoPhillips, and mostly in the U.S. Lower 48. That's where my background is, and I've done both conventional and unconventional facilities in the States here. And depending on where you're drilling, if you're in North Dakota, if you're in the Permian Basin, which is the hottest basin right now, you could have break evens varying, $20, $25 all the way up to, 100, maybe even more on some of these really old wells. So it's a tough challenge, and really it is for any engineers out there still working on upstream in the upstream sector. It's a very, very tough place to be right now, but it's also very interesting. And if you really, really like a tough challenge, is how to increase production, drop costs, and sort of deal with a heavy workload, right? Because there's been a lot of layoffs, a lot of workforce reductions in the upstream sector. I've heard about over 200,000 or more people have been laid off in this sector. So it is a very challenging market at this time.
You mentioned something there that's quite interesting, and maybe a lot of the listeners do know or don't know, but let's kind of break through the different shale plays and why is the Permian the one that everybody's going to right now, and the Balkans kind of, I've seen some articles that maybe it's kind of coming back, but the Permian is the one that people are still drilling the most. Why is that?
Yes. So the Permian Basin is a basin that just keeps on giving. I mean, it apparently, so you can do a horizontal job, a frac job, or hydraulic fracturing job, is what they would say. The industry calls it. It's basically when you drill down a vertical well and then horizontally drill maybe up to a mile. And once you're in the pay zone, this is in a formation such as the Permian, it could have 3 pay zones or 3 liquid producing zones in one horizontal well. So you can tap multiple zones, not just one zone like maybe in the Permian. So first, that's the number one reason I'd say it's got rich liquids production. Also, the costs are so much lower if you don't have to transport it all the way from North Dakota all the way down to the Houston or some of these Gulf Coast shipping ports where you could offload this liquid. So you got less marketing costs, less pipeline costs, less infrastructure to deal with, and it's purely just that. I mean, there's infrastructure already there in West Texas, and you have a lot of seismic, a lot more data involved with some of these producers have been there for maybe 15, 20 years, and they have the data, and so they can extract as much oil as possible with the most advanced techniques currently around. So I see Permian keep on growing. If you look on a lot of the new projects or the new acquisitions, the M&A activity is all pretty much in the Permian Basin for the U.S. lower 48. It's probably one of those old fields that people forgot about, maybe when the oil was $100, and now it's one of the busiest places on earth. So it's there. It's right now. Permian Basin is probably the place to be if you're looking for a job.
Right. No, I've seen a lot of posts on LinkedIn recently. People saying, "Hey, we're looking for folks in the Permian Basin, even some Eagle Ford stuff too, but maybe the Permian." You mentioned a couple of things in your last comment there. You talked about infrastructure and shipping costs. So, what percentage of this oil that's being taken out of the Balkan or the Permian or where these different shale plays is actually being refined in the States, and what percentage is being sent overseas as more raw crude oil?
So I don't have those specific numbers on hand right now, but I could tell you after the U.S. opened up the exports to exporting liquids, oil and natural gas liquids to international players. There's been a substantial increase in the amount of liquid oil being shipped off into the foreign markets. It's no surprise there. I mean, it's definitely was flooded a bit with WTI price below $50 at the time when that ban was ruled out, was basically canceled, right, from the U.S. Congress. And now we have definitely a surplus in storage in the lower 48. And so how do we just deal with this surplus is a big question right now. A lot of people talking about it, and that's one thing that this whole the Bakken doesn't have access to. Is it's just a little further away from the international markets. You really need to have a strong infrastructure built, and at $100 oil, it wasn't worth the money to build that infrastructure. It was just, let's go now and let's start pumping this oil and separating it out and selling the gas. And what was used mostly, and it probably is still mostly used today, is use trucks, right? You just fill up the tank of your truck, it's big 18-wheelers, and bring them to the next shipping terminal, and then finally get them to the international market. So it was and then what you do with the excess gas is you flare it, right? So you wouldn't even put it in a pipeline, a natural gas pipeline. You'd have these huge just flares, these flames going 15 feet up in the air. And as an environmental standpoint, it's a waste. I mean, it's not economical. Well, it is economical, but it's not environmentally friendly.
Right.
And at these prices now, you don't see that as much of an issue, because it's what is it now, 50? But no, it's less than $44 last Friday. So it's definitely been a challenge for that area environmentally.
Yeah, and one other thing that you touched on there loosely is compared to the Permian, we've worked in both areas, and in the Permian, when we go out on a pipeline project or a well, locating a well, whatever it is, you can't hardly walk without stepping over an existing pipeline. But if you go to the Balkan, you can't find an existing pipeline, and so all of that there's a lot of factors on the Balkan project that we worked on. They were looking to build a big pipeline to tie into, and it was going to go up 100 miles, these refineries and whatnot. And, I don't know if they ever actually built out that phase of the project, because obviously the price has gone down since then. But it's one of those things that you don't really think about. And you're right that there is a lot of stuff in West Texas already there that makes it easier to work in.
Definitely.
So let's transition a little bit. You mentioned natural gas a little bit and the flare off, and one of the problems that's plagued natural gas since its fall in 2008 is an oversupply. And we're starting to see prices that are coming back up a little bit. And so it looks like it's becoming a little bit more economical to get back in there. I've heard that even here that there's going to be some more rigs in the area to get into some of this dry gas. What are you hearing on that front?
Yeah, so I recently heard, so one of my previous employers, they're ConocoPhillips, as of last week, and this was November 8th or 10th, that they're going to attempt to sell $8 billion worth of gas assets. So this includes their producing sites, and I heard it includes some of the areas in New Mexico, some of the areas that are heavily in the gas production, and potentially in Texas as well. So they haven't isolated exactly where these sites are that are going to be sold, but they're big companies are selling their non-core assets, and it looks like, from what I can tell, a lot of these players are trying to stick to the shale oil production, where you can just turn the spigot, or turn the site on, and you could have a well start up in about 14 days, which is unheard of. I mean, before it would be maybe years until you could actually get your first drop of production. But this new shale play or shale in general has just transformed the whole industry in terms of how long it takes to get a project online, the break even cost, the payback time. So currently about a new shale play on average is about a 1.5 year payback time, and it would take about a year, potentially a lead lead time, but that's dropping rapidly as we speak. There's companies that can actually do it in a matter of months to actually lead to plan a project, and actually to get their first drop of oil could be a couple days, 15 days, 14 days. And so what this challenge is for my company that I currently work for, as an EPC and engineering company, is that we have very, very tight deadlines in actually designing a facility if they want it in 30 days. So we have to have a project, we have to have all our information in as soon as possible, so we can get the final design work, the CAD drawings, everything built and set up in a month. So that's what we're kind of seeing here, is that there's a humongous increase in demand and the workload in terms of projects in the upstream industry. It's just I've definitely been seeing an uptick in sort of my workload, and times and how much time I spend in the office has been going up. So it's definitely it's a big challenge, but it's definitely there's definitely a lot of good assets here in U.S. that have good low break evens and could continue to produce for the future.
And so, do you think we're going to see more of a revitalization of like the Haynesville Shale, or do you think we're going to see a place like the Eagle Ford where there's a little bit more of a mix of liquids and gas in the play that you could kind of hit?
Yes, yeah. So that sort of depends on in terms of the company who's doing that. Some companies are specializing in gas, some are specializing in liquids, and just want to get rid of all their gas. So it really depends on the company, but overall, I'd sort of see kind of a mix. Potentially one company going for all liquids, 100%, and another company potentially going, 80-20 gas. So they're trying to focus on gas. And once they have their, core specialty, they're going to kind of specialize in one area, kind of like a lot of companies are doing right now. They're trying to specialize in one core basin or geographic area, and just really, stay there and focus all their energy, all their resources in developing their CapEx budget for just this one play. So I think we're going to see more of that, just more of you'll see some maybe consolidation in terms of which companies are going to make it from this cycle. It's been a very, very rigorous cycle here, but hasn't been a whole lot of M&A activity. There's been a few big major acquisitions, but I still think we're going to still see some more consolidation in the future. Potentially about 3 years from now, we could see more. That's just my prediction.
Well, we'll hold you to it.
Okay.
You mentioned something there about companies focusing on some area, and I saw some reports the other day about Chesapeake, and I think it was in Oklahoma, that they're really trying to maximize. They kind of gave this area a new name, even though it was an area that they've already been drilling in, but they're really just trying to maximize the production from that area. Did you hear that report?
yes, the Chesapeake, that's more of a kind of a marketing move on Chesapeake's part, finding a very good resource close to their backyard. I mean, it's really close, and they're not really looking to invest in offshore expensive a huge platform off the Gulf of Mexico. And so that's what really I see a lot of companies doing, like Chesapeake, that they're going to try to find value right next to their existing assets.
So one more question, and it's not necessarily a one-to-one with upstream, but what are you hearing about, facilities? I've heard there's some talk of retooling some of the facilities in the U.S. and some of these LNG plants to help process some of the gas that's coming out. What are you hearing on the facilities front as far as building new and retooling existing facilities here at home?
Yes, that's a great question. I'm hearing some things right now. They're definitely retooling, but one thing first, you have before you retool or actually implement a plan, you got to know your costs, right? So I've noticed a humongous demand in analytics and data, right? So you'll have there's an immense demand for data scientists, those the IT specialists in terms of aggregating some of this big data right now, and all we have so much data, and there's just so much potential in dropping costs and improving reliability as well as efficiencies. That's really the driver for these new facilities that are going to be being revamped or retooled. So I definitely think there's going to be a lead time. You got to know all the numbers before they actually implement and execute. It's a huge change from the thinking of the past, where you'd see, let's do it and let's get it done, and just whatever it costs, right? But now we're seeing more of a development stage, a rapid development stage of how to handle the cost. For example, BP, they've done a major offshore platform, the Big Dog 2. Mad Dog. Mad Dog.
Close enough.
Yeah, close enough. Yeah, the Mad Dog, and they actually kind of went over this over in the OTC 2016, the Offshore Technology Conference. It's a really great event to go to if anyone hasn't gone to that. They do it every year, so if you have a chance to visit, definitely. And what BP was highlighting there is that they dropped their price on that Mad Dog platform. It's on the offshore of Gulf Coast. Is that the cost has been dropped by 50%. So
Wow.
that's huge, 50%, and this is in cost $1 billion. I mean, they're saving $1 billion or more. So if you could do that, you could have a lot of new projects potentially come up.
Wow, that's no, I haven't heard that. I've heard some talk about that particular rig, but I didn't know all those specifics. That's pretty exciting stuff. So let's transition a little bit here into petrochemicals. It's an area
Yes.
that you also work in. So first, kind of break down, hey, what is petrochemicals? How does it tie in? And then we'll go from there.
So upstream is what we were talking about before, the basically exploration and production of hydrocarbons, so oil and natural gas. The oil and natural gas can get shipped into the infrastructure we talked about briefly, which that would be considered the midstream sector. So any of your big pipeline companies, you have your Kinder Morgans, your also smaller companies in the midstream sector. So
Enterprise, DCP.
Enterprise, yes, missing yeah. So there's yeah. So you have a lot of companies in that sector, and they're just there to transport the fluid, either gas or liquid, through the pipeline to your terminals where they can be sent off to your offshore. You can sell it to your international market or keep it in the domestic market. So once they ship it, let's say to a storage facility like some big tanks, they can send that to a plant. So that's where you're getting in your downstream sector and your petrochemical side of things. And when we're talking about this downstream sector, I'd say it's one of the most promising areas right now with the current price of oil. In the downstream sector, they take this raw product, the oil and natural gas, and they can break it down. So typically right now, what you see growing in Louisiana and Houston is a lot of these ethane crackers, they call it. So what happens is they send this oil, and you basically break the hydrocarbon down into its basic carbon building blocks. Basically, you get your methane, ethane, propane, butane, and from there you can build polymers or copolymers, such as polyethylene, which is used in practically everything we have. So you'll have polyethylene in your water bottles, polyethylene in your car. You have rubber tires that's been used product of oil and gas. Your dashboard on your car is oil and gas. The sneakers you're wearing or your sandals you're wearing, made in oil and gas product. Sometimes even your glasses. Some of the frames are even made out of some of the downstream sectors products. So what they do is they actually transform that oil or natural gas product into actually something that we actually can use. Detergents. So any laundry detergent you use, also a byproduct of oil and gas, and some of the specialty chemicals. So, and even in the medical field,
it's everywhere, right?
It's everywhere. Yes, yes. So I just wanted to make sure that this sector, you can make so many different products, and there's so much specialized. So there's so many different types of plants in this sector that I can talk about. I have most of my experience right now is in the polyethylene. So that's why I was mentioning that.
Right. Well, let's just kind of take a step back, because one of the things that the oil and gas industry gets, and sometimes rightfully so, but a lot of times it's not true, is that they're big, bad, evil people. And hey, every industry's got its bad apple, so to speak. But the oil and gas, it produces so many good things that's just basic to our lives, that I think a lot of people miss that. That says, hey, if we just shut down the oil and gas industry, life as we know it would essentially end. I'm not talking about you couldn't drive your car anymore. I'm talking you can't go to the hospital and get an operation anymore. And I don't think people really understand just how integrated, as you're talking about, this downstream sector actually affects our everyday lives.
Yes, I couldn't agree more, Ryan. You hit it on the nail right there. It's really not just your gasoline in your car, and that's what everyone thinks. Oil and gas. Oh yeah, it's just gas in the car. That's what I'm thinking. And so if we transition to your electric cars or your biomass or different types of technologies for your transportation, we won't need oil and gas anymore. But that is certainly not the case. We will need oil and gas for so many applications, and I've kind of mentioned a few, but it's definitely true. We need it for any operations. The food and gas. The food we eat. Right. It takes tons of oil and gas products to the fertilizers. You have the pesticides. All this takes the oil and gas industry to actually produce.
And you mentioned a couple things there. You said you talked about electrical, you talked about biomass, and the problem is, electrical cars, they're coming along, and we'll see how far that gets. More power to them if they can pull it off. But biomass, I think that's kind of an industry where we kind of look at it, and it sounds a little bit better than what it may be, because it has severe limitations. Am I wrong?
It definitely does have a lot of limitations. Definitely. So I've done some research in the biomass. And what really now is the big next thing is the algae, right? So they can transform CO2. One of the things that are that's it's a climate change. Which one of the things that are in the climate change one of the big players in climate change is carbon dioxide. So it basically can transform that CO2 byproduct, and with other with its properties of its what's it called? It's scientifically proven that it can actually produce biomass at a high efficiency. So my main concern here for biomass is the amount of area of land that needs to be used or to produce the amount of fuel that we actually need in the U.S. So the global oil production or energy production is quads, so quadrillion BTUs, and the amount of energy just to produce the amount of let's say algae we need to produce for the demand for just the U.S. I mean, it could take the size of Texas, right? The size, a mass of that size is not feasible at this time. We might see more breakthroughs in science that might show that you can maybe increase the efficiencies, but right now it's just not there.
Right. It's one of those things that's worth some more exploration, but right now it's a little bit more trendy than probably the actual reality of the viability of it is long term.
Correct.
And so anyways, how do you, as someone in the oil and gas industry, works with these petrochemicals, works with the drillers and all that, how do you try to change the perception and say, hey, look, what we're doing here is a good and noble thing and we want more people to get behind it?
Yes, yeah. So I try to do it in a subtle way. I feel like some of these companies, I don't want to name any names, but they try to push it, kind of shove it down people's throats in a way. They hire some people that, they might do a rally or some sorts of events and kind of do things, maybe do giveaways or things like that. That kind of doesn't seem genuine at times. I mean, it's great that you can give things for certain events or everything, but we really need to show uh, a sense of informing them, not just kind of giving away things. I definitely think that's a way to influence people, but I feel that there's definitely ways to improve our communication skills with others. It's just like saying what does the oil and gas industry do? It produces, all these sorts of different medicines, all these different sorts of products, and that has not been communicated very clearly by a lot of the companies in the industry. So I definitely see a little bit more of a subtle and a slow progression of information. I feel like there's a lot of rush to inform and try to affect people, and I just don't see that being effective in the long term.
Agreed. We'll let you go with this question. Let's say we have you on a year from today. We're sitting here a year from today. 2017 is getting ready to come to a close. What did 2017 look like for the oil and gas industry? Was it a good year? Was it a slow year? Was it more of a roller coaster year? What are you thinking we're going to see for 2017?
So this is just a projection. I feel like there's so many experts have so many different opinions, but I definitely see some potential spike down, from right now from prices to a lower level. Could be significant, could be a little bit, in 30 range. But I definitely could see a definite spike up. So my prediction is it's very difficult to predict if it's what the exact price will be a year from now. But on average, I'd say fifty to $60 is my projection, and that's just the on my average right now. But it's definitely changing, and with the more information I get, I'm kind of developing a model myself, try to figure out what the price will be, the forecast. And there's so many inputs. OPEC has that meeting end of November this year, and that may be a big driver of prices in 2017. So once I have that data, I can give you a better projection, but
Oh,
it's
I
kind
hear
of in
you.
the air.
Well, I appreciate the honesty that your prediction is it's difficult to predict. And so that's, there is so much wisdom in that statement. And the reason is because if you go read a lot of, and these are some good, hardworking people who put out some of this stuff, but if you go read some of the predictions and some of the cause and effect and where the industry is going, and you go look at it, and they may have two factors they list in the article is what they're basing their reasoning and their projections on. And you look at that and you go, there's so much more that has to be considered before you can make this kind of prediction. Maybe you have it and you didn't include it in this article here, but these two things, they're just not enough. And so it is it's a fun topic, but it's like you say, it's hard to predict for sure. So Alex, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything that you need to plug? Where can people find you? And anything we didn't cover that you want to hit on right now, feel free.
Sure, guys. Yes. If anyone has any questions or wants to learn more about me, just visit my website. It's www.alexrojasenergy.com, and you can also follow me on Twitter. I'm always tweeting about the latest updates in the oil and gas industry. So feel free to follow me, guys. Thank you so much, Ryan, for inviting me again.
Oh, Alex, it was my pleasure, and we hope to have you on again in the future. Maybe we'll get into 2017 a little bit, and we can kind of circle back around and see where things are heading. Okay.
Okay, sounds
All
good.
right. Thanks, Alex. Thanks again to Alex for coming on. I will link to his website and Twitter, like I mentioned, in the show notes, so you could reach out to him if you had any questions about what we discussed. Next week, we're probably going to actually have two podcasts. We've got a guy coming from the Washington Times on, and we have another guest that's lined up. And so a few good guests we have lined up to get us through the end of the year. Really solid stuff. Just recorded one today, actually, from South Africa. And so look for that. I'll keep you informed on when that will be released. And we have one I'm recording later tonight, early in the morning actually, from a guy in China, a professor in China. We're going to talk about energy transition in China. That should be exciting, and I will let you know when that's coming out as well. Thanks again for tuning in to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. If you could, please rate, subscribe, review wherever you found this podcast. And until next time, keep climbing.